Hey guys, it's Miss Phillips here, and today I want to talk to you about biotic and abiotic factors in ecosystems. So an ecosystem is made up of all of the living and non-living things in an area, and all of the factors within an ecosystem are interdependent, meaning they depend upon and also impact one another at all times. So biotic factors are living things. These are things like plants, animals, fungi, and bacteria and other microorganisms. Abiotic are non-living things. This is stuff like water, soil, rock, air, and other gases like CO2, sunlight, temperature, and pH, which means the acidity of the environment. Biotic and abiotic factors are interdependent and they interact. In many ways, biotic factors are dependent on abiotic factors for survival, and changes in abiotic factors can affect organisms. Changes in biotic factors can also affect abiotic factors. Finally, biotic factors compete for both abiotic and biotic resources within their ecosystem. So an example of interdependence. Biotic factors depend on abiotic factors. In this example, we have a plant, which is a biotic factor, and it depends on the abiotic factors of light, carbon dioxide, and water. Those abiotic factors allow it to do photosynthesis and produce its carbohydrates, which help it to grow, and then oxygen, which other organisms depend on to breathe. So changes in any of these abiotic factors would affect the biotic factor. If there was not enough water, or not enough sunlight, or not enough carbon dioxide, this plant could not grow and it could not produce oxygen. Here's another example. The abiotic factor is water, and there are many different biotic factors in this ecosystem that rely on that water to survive. The fish, the sea stars, the anemones, they all rely on abiotic factor of water as a place to live and survive. A lot of animals or organisms also rely on water to drink, so that's another abiotic factor that biotic factors are dependent upon. Another example is soil. A lot of organisms use soil to live. It's their habitat. So we have some worms and we also have a mole, and both of these organisms live in the soil. The soil is an abiotic factor that those biotic factors, worms and moles, rely on to survive. And then we also have soil as an abiotic factor that plants need to survive. So rocks and soil allow plants to grow roots, which allows them to stick themselves in one place and survive. Here we have an example of a little frog. Many frogs are dependent on the temperature of their environments. A lot of frogs cannot survive if the temperature of their environment varies even by 1 degree. The frog will die if it gets 1 degree hotter or 1 degree cooler. So that's the way that the temperature and abiotic factor can affect the biotic factor, the frog. Okay, so let's talk about dependence or interdependence between biotic factors. This is a food web, which hopefully you remember from 7th grade. And you know that in a food web, all of the organisms are interdependent and depend upon each other for food and survival. So the arrows tell us where the chemical energy from one organism is traveling to the next organism, which eats it. In this way, all of these organisms are dependent on one another in this ecosystem. Competition is another way that the biotic and abiotic factors are related in an ecosystem. So on the left we have plants, and plants can compete for both nutrients and light. So as you can see, a plant might grow taller than another plant in order to get light from the sun, and the other plant will be shaded. Another thing they can compete for is nutrients in the soil. So the roots can grow over one another, competing for those nutrients. In the middle, we have a groundhog and some birds competing for some sort of seed that is food. And then on the right, we have the water buffalo and the zebras competing for water in an area. So they have to compete for that abiotic resource. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is the example of how changes in both biotic and abiotic factors can really affect an entire ecosystem. So we're going to look at the Yellowstone Park ecosystem, and we're going to look at the wolves. So as you can see in these pictures, at some point in time, the wolves in Yellowstone, which are the keystone species or the apex predator, were very, very overpopulated. And as a result, they were killing all of the cattle. So ranchers and the US government removed these wolves from the ecosystem. The red arrows and X's show the result of removing the wolves from the ecosystem. So as wolf population went down, the elk population rose extremely. And as a result, those elk are going to eat those aspen trees and those willow trees. And as those trees populations go down, the beaver population was completely erased from the ecosystem because that beaver relies on those trees to build its dams and for food. The coyote population over on the right top went up because wolves used to eat them because they were their competition, or kill them rather. And so the coyote population increased, and as a result, the red fox population completely disappeared. So the red foxes were completely killed out of that ecosystem. Now, after this happened and the ecosystem was so drastically changed, the US government decided to reintroduce wolves into the Yellowstone ecosystem. These pictures show the results of reintroducing the wolves. So the wolf population increased and the elk population decreased. There were fewer elk eating those plants, so their populations increased. As a result of the trees coming back, the beavers returned to the ecosystem and their populations went up. The coyote population went down because the wolves were hunting them, and the red foxes were able to come back to the ecosystem because the coyotes weren't hunting all of them. So as you can see, all of these factors in an ecosystem are greatly affected by changes in any one of them. So I hope that helps you see how ecosystems have both biotic and abiotic factors and how interdependent those factors are.